few weeks ago, I was approached by my sister-in-law to make a memory book for my brother's 60th birthday. Obviously, this is a very daunting task, and I'm putting a lot of pressure on myself. And I thought I would just take you along and show you how I constructed the cover of this book. So here I'm taking apart a vintage book that she had sent me along with a couple of other books. I showed those in another video a while back. This was one of the options, and since it is a book about Vienna, which is where we both live, and it says something about 60 years, that was the obvious choice for the cover. Unfortunately, the cover was too small, so I needed to find a solution to enlarge the cover a little bit. So this is what I'm going to do here, and I'm also going to make a few changes. I was not able to record myself talking while working on this book because honestly, even though it might not look like it here, I had no idea what I was doing. As always, I work in baby steps. I had no vision whatsoever of what this final cover could look like. So even at this stage where you see me preparing the cover and just taking this book apart, I do not know what to do with it after I have completed that step. But that's just how my brain seems to work. I have to see first what the individual parts look like for me to imagine further what I could do with them. I never have the final picture in my head before the previous step is completed. So here I'm just tidying up the edges of this book, and by the way, I did clean it with some baby wipes as good as I could. And finally, I just wanted to make sure that these edges are as smooth as possible by going over them with some sandpaper. This block is something that I found at my local hardware store. The inside of the cover was beautiful as well, but unfortunately we're not going to see that in the end because I will be gluing this onto another cover. So I don't know if you have ever made a memory book for someone. I feel like it's a huge responsibility, especially when it's not even your own idea, but you have been asked to make one by somebody. So obviously that person has expectations. Probably not as big as your own expectations for yourself, but the pressure is on. And obviously I had a time limit. I mean, I did have quite a few weeks to finish this, but when you have no idea what to do, even a few weeks just doesn't seem enough time. So this is the cover of the book that I'm going to use to put under my other cover to enlarge my book. This is a beautiful children's book. You just saw some of the cute illustrations. This is actually the second copy that I found at my local Goodwill. I have used many of the beautiful children's images in another journal, and so I have now a whole block again to work and play with. And again, I'm going to take apart this book cover. It was already kind of falling apart, or did I damage it while cutting it? That is also possible. I don't remember at this point. So I'm doing the exact same thing. I'm just cutting off the spine first with a craft knife, and then I will clean up those edges with scissors, and I think I also file them again. So that was as far as my mind was able to think at this point. And then the next obvious thing to do was, of course, to make everything cohesive. So I ended up changing the color of this blue cover. You will see that in a moment. And while I'm making this voiceover, I'm still not much farther with this book. Thankfully, I still have a few weeks. And here you see how the cover will be enlarged. And unfortunately, I also have to get rid of those cute insides because it just doesn't go with the theme that I have for this book. So luckily, I had this beautiful mustard or ochre yellow acrylic paint in my stash, which fit so beautifully to the smaller cover. So I just took a paintbrush and painted over the whole cover, and it was so opaque that I didn't even need a second coat, so that was great. So here I'm just covering the front side and then going over the sides. For the second cover, or for the back side, I then realized it's actually much easier to do the sides first and then do the front. Learning by doing. So going back to where I am now. So after this part, I actually didn't know what to do for a couple of weeks. It was just laying there, thoroughly drying for, I don't know, at least 2 weeks. Until I had some more inspiration. So in the meantime, I've also made some decorative papers that I could use on the inside, although I'm not sure if I will use them as part of the pages or if I would use them just for making ephemera. No idea. But I had a lot of fun making those decorative papers, and it brought me one step closer to having an idea of what the actual book, once the signatures are inside, could look like. At this point, I don't even know yet how I'm going to bind my book, what the spine is going to look like, or what it will be made out of. No idea. I will tackle that problem, or that, it's not a problem. I will tackle that issue once I get there. It's not always the best solution to not have these things planned, because obviously some things need to be thought through, and once you have things glued together or painted or whatever, some changes will not be able to be made. So I'm just hoping for the best and hoping that my procedure is going to work for this. So I'm still not done. Oh yeah, this is after the 2 weeks of drying time. I finally had an idea of what I wanted to do. I had, by coincidence, watched a Tim Holtz live video. This is the latest one where he's sharing his new products together with Stampers Anonymous, his stamps and the stencils. And he was showing, of course, all of the beautiful products that the makers made using his products. And even though I have none of his newest products, although I have to confess, I did order those large numbers. I don't know what they're called. They're these huge number stamps. They look like they're made with paint brush strokes. Oh my goodness. Anything number and grungy is a must for me. So I have ordered that. I did not receive it yet. Can't wait to get them. Will be using some of them for this memory book actually, because I will be stamping 60 definitely on various places. I just quickly need to go back to what I'm doing here on screen. So I decided to add some scrapbook paper. This is also Tim Holtz. I believe it's from the memorandum paper pad. This is still from the 12 by 12 paper pad. If I'm not mistaken, this is not available anymore in that size. I think they only make it in the smaller size now. Please correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. And when I was watching that live, it doesn't matter whether you have those same exact products or not. I really can only give you the advice to please watch Tim Holtz lives. Doesn't even matter if you have his products or not. There is so much inspiration in those videos. A lot of the makers share their techniques either on YouTube or on their blog or Instagram or whatever. But even if you don't watch any of those, actually I didn't, because the ones I was interested in didn't have anything. But just by looking at the makes, like I felt my head was exploding from ideas after watching that. And I had to watch it actually a few times because there was so much. I didn't even know what to do with myself, what technique to start with. So that was what got me to continue on this cover. And I was reminded of a technique that I hadn't done in a while. And actually, I haven't been doing mixed media in that sense in a while now, I have the feeling. So I wanted to get back in the mixed media game and use a lot of different mediums and experiment and just have fun playing with the products that I already had. So I decided to add this swirly stencil. It's also by Tim Holtz on this cover using texture paste. And I realized after I put it on the top and the bottom that I couldn't put it in the middle before the other two, that like the top and the bottom, were dry, because you can't put the stencil down without ruining the design, obviously. But I wanted to add some embossing glaze, and this was the color Fossilized Amber on top of that before it dried. Did I say embossing powder? I don't know. It's embossing glaze. So I wanted a variation of color of the glazes. So I put the Fossilized Amber on some parts, and then I'm going to add some Rusty Hinge on other parts. But I realized that the texture paste it dries so quickly that actually it hardly stuck on the texture paste at this point. You see, there's hardly any there. So I didn't quite know how to deal with that. So I decided to procrastinate and to deal with the top cover first. And I decided I wanted to add some modern elements to this very antique cover, because that's one of the things I really, really love in most of my projects, more and more now with time, is to mix vintage and modern. I just love it. I also love it in buildings. I love it with interior design. It just makes for such an interesting contrast. So I am again using my embossing powders, and I'm using these beautiful fun round stamps by PM Artist Studio. They are super light foam stamps. I have been using them so much lately, and I'm having fun with them. And yeah, here I'm just melting the embossing powder. So obviously I needed 3 stamps because I always like having 3s. So here they're all embossed. You see the contrast, you know, you have this very vintage cover and you would never expect to have such a modern circle design. And then I had the idea, well, why not use my embossing dabber to add more embossing glaze? The difference, of course, by using your dabber is that your embossing glaze, and I used pumice stone at this stage, is not only going to stick to the texture paste, but also to the background, to the book cover. I was aware of that, but I was very curious how this would look. And I did that on both sides. And actually, this was super brave because I did not know whether this would look any good. And this is the cover, you know, it's not like something you can easily fix if it goes wrong. Once the glaze is there, the glaze is there. I would have had to throw this out or use it for something else and come up with something else. So I really felt the pressure was on. But at the same time, I really had fun experimenting and trying things that I had never tried before. And that is usually when the best things come out, at least in my experience. So then after that was dry and the glaze was embossed, I really liked the look that it gave the edges because it made them look more vintage and grungy and dirty and just awesome. The rest of the embossing glaze was dry. By the way, of course, I waited for the texture paste to dry before I embossed the glaze on top. And so finally, after that texture paste then was dry, I was able to add the middle part. I even contemplated leaving that empty, but I thought it looked better if the whole edge of the book would have the same look. This time I knew I had to be faster, and I added the fossilized amber embossing glaze right away, and after it was dry, again I heat embossed it. You can't really see how shiny it is in the video. Then I'm using that same technique and adding the embossing dabber everywhere to then add the pumice stone embossing glaze on top. Really, really love that effect. So many of you have asked me to share this process of making this book. It's not a journal, it's a book. And I'm trying to share as many parts as I can. Obviously, there will be a lot of photos, or actually I cannot share any of the photos because they are private. I don't think my brother would be thrilled for them to be on YouTube. And there's also lots and lots of writing because my sister-in-law asked all of his family and friends to write something like a nice memory that they had with him and things that they appreciate about him and things like that. So there's pages and pages and pages of written material that I somehow have to include, which is part of why I feel so overwhelmed, because I have never dealt with that much writing in a book, and I don't just want to bind it. I mean, those pages are, I think they're even two-sided, so I can't just, well, actually I could, thinking of it now, I could just bind them in to just leave through like regular pages. Maybe I'll do that for some of them. And there are tons of photos, like really tons. And I already told my sister-in-law there's no way I'm going to be able to include all of them. So she let me know which ones are the most important ones that were sent to her from friends and family that really should be in there. And hopefully it will all work out in the end. So what you see here looks very strange, I know. So I added some more rusty hinge. And I know it looks really weird and blotchy at this point, but you will see later once the cover is on and I'm adding something else to the cover, then it will be okay. So now I decided that the cover needed to balance out those dark rusty hinge spots from the bottom cover, and so I'm adding some more rings. These are from another, or is it? No, actually it's the same stamp set, but it's a different stamp from that set from PM Artist Studio. I just wanted that same color to repeat on this part of the cover. And here I'm just showing you, if you ever are in the situation where your glaze or your embossing powder clumps up, I saw this in one of the Tim Holtz lives, you just tap your paper from the bottom with your fingers and that will immediately loosen up the powder again and declump it. I think I just made up that word, but it's okay, you know what I mean. So once I had heat embossed those darker circles, I decided to edge everything with walnut stain. I did that for both the top and the bottom covers, just to make everything look more old and grungy. I think that's it for the outside, yeah. And for the inside, then I decided I wanted the inside to reflect more on also what's going on the outside. So I decided to also add some of these circles over that scrapbook paper using colors that I already used on the outside. So that's again the fossilized amber, and then afterwards also some of the pumice stone. I just love this pumice stone color so much. So I did that for both the front and the back, and now everything looks a lot more cohesive. So currently I'm in this stage of printing out some of the photos. I think I'll also print some of them out on transparencies. I'm still struggling figuring out what to use as the base for the pages. Oh yeah, I forgot this part. I realized, at first actually I thought I could just leave the back cover blank, but looking at it, it looked way too new compared to everything I had done to the front cover. So I should have thought about this earlier. I could have done it at once. So now I had to do everything again. And of course, everything took twice the time because everything had to dry again and so forth. This time I actually thought I would be smart and I could do the swirls here all at once, going from top down to the bottom. But then of course now I realize, no, I can't, because again, I would be going into the wet texture paste. So I did exactly the same thing that I did on the front cover, and I had to wait for those parts to dry before I could do the middle part. Oh well. So basically I'm using the exact same techniques. I'm doing them in this, I think in the same order. And finally at the end they will look like they actually belong together. I'm always thinking, like, do we really need to do something with the back cover, because we never see it, because that's what the book obviously lays on all the time. But of course you will have it in your hands, people will look at it, and of course it looks nicer if the back is also as beautiful as the front, obviously. Yeah, so as I was saying, I am currently still trying to figure out what to do with the base for my pages. They need to be sturdy. I'm also not sure what I'm going to do for the binding. Also, actually, I considered doing a spiral binding with my cinch, but the spirals are not going to be big enough, so that's not going to work, unfortunately. That's where I am at the moment. I have not glued the covers onto each other yet because I want to leave my options open. I might have to move them a little bit depending on what kind of binding I'm doing, but this is where I am, and I hope it provided some kind of inspiration for you. Love you guys. Mwah! Mwah!